Hi, and welcome to Couples Therapy Bites.
I'm Stephen.
I'm Erin.
And yes, we're sitting by a fire in July because we want to create some ambiance for this segment of Couples Therapy Bites. I'm sweating already.
That's not why we're sitting by a fire.
But it's going to be great.
We're sitting by a fire because tonight we are sharing some heavy, hard stuff, for me at least. And
for me, I would say.
I just don't want to tell you what you feel.
Don't want to assume.
No.
Yeah.
And it feels comforting. So
I can take that.
Yes.
Some of you might know, some of you might not know that Erin and I are in the process of writing a book. And basically our big idea here in Couples Therapy Bites and in our book and our work with couples and our work with anybody, anybody, is simply that your life is going to be the best, make the most sense when you understand your story. And for a couple, it's when you can understand your individual story and how that comes together
with your partner's story. To create a shared story.
A together story. And so one of the things that we are in the process of doing is just writing our story. And so we have like these different segments of stories that we're writing about. And so what we wanted to do is just share some of those segments with you. This particular segment that we're writing about is something we've talked about before, which was our first miscarriage. But we've never talked about our miscarriage this way. So what's going to happen is Erin has written...
We have employed a writing instructor. Her name's Nadia Colburn. We love her and adore her and are so thankful for her work and her help.
Check her out.
And she recommended that we start here in this topic, and then we sort of decided to do it this way, where we've both written about this topic separately, which we have done before. But tonight we're going to read it. So tonight I'm going to read mine, and Stephen has not heard this story.
And then we'll just kind of interact around it, and then I will read my portion, what I've written as well, and we'll interact around that. So just a process of storytelling and then bearing witness to one another's story and talking about it. So
yeah. Here we go. Is this the
so
cue to begin?
So this is it. So
also, a lot of you have seen and heard, I am not, I'm a pretty private person, which I realize sounds ridiculous that I'm posting on YouTube that I'm a private person, but I am, and this has all been a big stretch for me, and this is like as big a stretch as I can think, or one of the biggest stretches, to share something so intimate, so personal, with all of you. However, I do think it is helpful for us. I hope it is helpful for you. That's enough, huh? Here we go. So it is called We Lament. I wanted to have children my whole life. I loved my mother completely, and I couldn't wait to be a mother just like her, well, mostly just like her, when I grew up. The husband part I was never quite sure of. I couldn't imagine such a thing, but the kid part I knew for certain I wanted in my life. I was sure when the time came I wouldn't care if they were boys or girls, but if I did get to have my choice, it was going to be a boys and a bunch of them. And then imagine my surprise when I found myself the subject of interest of a man whom I was completely smitten with. Stephen and I met while we were volunteering on a middle school youth retreat. We're both kid people. We like to play, we like acting like kids ourselves, we like being with kids. We married knowing one day we would want kids. I wanted them right away, but Stephen wasn't quite ready, and then Stephen was ready. And suddenly my being ready was put to the test, and it turns out I wasn't quite ready. Or was I? Or wasn't I? How could I know? I took this question to my mom and to Stephen over and over, and then over and over again. And for the entire 2 years we had been married, I charted my cycles dutifully to prevent pregnancy. And then 1 month I thought I might be late. It wasn't that I was late yet, but I didn't feel like a period was coming on like I normally did. Honestly, it was probably all just wishful thinking on my part. Oh, and I thought I could be. Something shifted in me. But the next day, my period did arrive, and I cried and I cried. Part of me wanted just to have the decision made for me, and then part of me did realize that what I wanted was in fact to be pregnant without having to risk hoping or without having to want be. Saying out loud that I wanted a baby felt risky to me, so exposing of my heart's deep desire to grow our family. Admitting I want a baby left me vulnerable, and I hated being vulnerable. But there I was in tears and admitting that what my heart wanted. And then the next month, we used our charting skills in a new way, and we actually tried to get pregnant. 2 weeks later, worked itself out to being a week when I would be in St. Louis without Stephen. He and I talked each day on the phone, and on that day, when we could have known if my temperature stayed spiked or dropped, I lied straight into the phone. Next month, buddy, we'll just keep trying, I lied, and it felt so good because that morning I learned I was pregnant. I woke up at 5 a.m. because I couldn't sleep. I was so excited, and I tried so hard to keep myself in bed until the 6:15 when I could take my temperature, then go pee on a stick. And then those 2 pink lines appeared absolutely immediately, and I couldn't believe I didn't wake my mom up on the spot. As a general rule, I don't have patience, especially when I'm excited. I walk around practically bouncing off the walls. So I had to keep it together, and I had to temper myself, and somehow I was going to have to do this for another whole week until I could see Stephen in person and tell him our news. When I was younger, I saw a TV show where the wife surprised the dad with the news they were pregnant, and from that moment on, I was thrilled to somehow get to surprise Stephen with the news that we were pregnant. To say that Stephen went out on our engagement to surprise me was an unbelievable understatement. It was perfectly crafted, beginning to end. The execution of it went a little differently, but that's a story for a different day. But the crux of our engagement was a story. Stephen proposed to me with our love story, and every anniversary he adds a chapter. I didn't have a second thought when I realized how I wanted to tell him I was pregnant. I was going to add a chapter to our story. I worked out all the details, and it was perfect. I surprised him. So much so that as I was reading the story to him, I read out the part about being pregnant, and it passed right by him. He missed it. I looked up from my chapter, and I saw his blank look, so I looked back down and kept reading. It was another sentence or two before he stopped me and said, "Wait, are you telling me that you're pregnant like right now?" "Yes, Stephen, yes, I am. We are." And it was bliss. And then about 3 days later, I was so tired I couldn't keep my eyes open. I've never been that tired in all my life. I didn't know all the rules of being pregnant, so immediately I cut out just about everything, including coffee, and I had loved coffee. I don't know if it was just the loss of caffeine in my life or the fact that I'd added on a significant commute and found myself waking up way too early for my pregnant preference, but I was exhausted, and that's putting it mildly. Pregnancy for me was no joke. And then about a week or 2 after the exhaustion set in, then came the nausea, then the throwing up. I threw up everything all the time because the water was too warm. No, that water's too cold. Because I can smell food. No, I can't smell food. This air feels wrong. Basically anything, anytime. We'd have to pull over. I'd have to run off the couch, and I'd find myself throwing up. Every day for about 10 weeks, I threw up all over Bozeman, Montana. And I have known pregnant women who relish the fatigue, who relish the nausea, who relish the throwing up because it helps them to know things are good. I was not that woman. I was overwhelmed. I woke up and I cried almost immediately every day. I just couldn't imagine having to do any more days of the early rising, the careful monitoring of every aspect of my day, just to try to keep from throwing up, only to certainly throw up anyway. It was a fog. The only reason I was even able to give any grace at all to myself was because Stephen was holding our life together. I say I woke up, but really it was Stephen who would gently wake me each morning, who would help me get to the bathroom, get me in the shower, and then help me throw up. Then he'd had my tea ready, not too hot, not too cold. He'd have it ready for my long commute. He'd had my lunch made with plain crackers and the Tillamook medium cheddar loaf, sliced ever so thin so that I would get at least a little dairy, a little protein, a little fat, but almost not have to taste anything. And then when I get home from work, I'd open the door to our perfect little apartment overlooking the Bridger Mountains. Not that I actually noticed or cared what the view was in those weeks, but I would completely collapse on our couch. Stephen would make me to eat a little tiny something for dinner, and then he would accompany me on my almost guaranteed trip to the bathroom to throw it all back up. And then magic happened. At 9 weeks, we began interviewing midweeks, and in one of our interviews, the midwife asked if we wanted to try to hear the baby. No guarantees, of course. I was only 9 weeks along, and she made sure we knew not to expect anything. But she put her little wand to my belly, and after just a moment of searching, there was the most magical, thunderous beating I'd ever heard. And I knew I would throw up again and again for that little person growing in there. This wasn't all for naught. I was growing a person. It was really hard, but hearing him connected me to him, and I was willing to do anything for him. That night, we decided we needed to name our growing little heartbeat, and we decided baby Bozeman was promising, and Bo was a natural come from that. And it stuck. And for baby Beau, I was willing to do pregnant another day, even though it likely meant extracting pickle shards from my nose. For 10 weeks, we told almost no one of our growing news. I wanted to tell my mom in person. And while I had been with her when I found out I wasn't with Stephen, and I wasn't going to tell my mom before I told Stephen, she and I talked nearly every single day on the phone, but she wouldn't be visiting us until I was 10 weeks along. Telling my mom was almost as magical as telling Stephen had been. Almost immediately when she landed in Montana, we went back to our apartment and played for her the recording of our little Beau's heartbeat. She was hilarious, overjoyed. She didn't sleep a wink. And was at all the cute little grandmother shops. That's what I learned that day to call all those very cute boutiques that mothers themselves can't afford to purchase anything, but grandmothers can't actually help themselves. She was actually waiting for their doors to open. Stephen and I woke up to my mom with coffee and breakfast already made, a dozen red roses, baby blankets, onesies, toys, the softest stuffed animals that we've ever known. She was filled with joy, and her outlet that morning was shopping, and it seemed she bought all that Bozeman had to offer in the way of baby goods. And suddenly and wonderfully, it was even more real. She was sworn to secrecy, but by the end of her visit, we'd told the world. The secret was out, we were thrilled, we were having a baby. Never in the history of time had there been a baby any more wanted or any more loved than Beau, and we were thrilled with our friends and family's outpouring of support and delight and love. Also during my mom's visit, my throwing up started to slow down a little bit. I threw up just a few times that week, and she was immediately declared the best grandmother in all the universe. She had to leave, but she'd done more than we could have hoped she would. We were thrilled and ready, and in so many ways the fog was lifting and we were finding our way. With my mom supporting what Stephen had suggested all along, I put in my 2 weeks notice at my job with that ridiculous commute. We had our midwife picked, and we felt very excited about her proximity to Dave's Sushi, where we had decided we'd go after each appointment. The Reggie rule had been good to me during my sick times, and it remained my faithful friend. The week of our 14-week appointment was action-packed. On Monday, I was at work sitting at a yoga ball at my computer and felt so profoundly Beau dive right into my lower right side. I can feel that exact spot where he touched me as I write. I felt unsure if it was possible so early, but also completely sure at the same time. Oh, the wonder and delight of growing and carrying that little guy grew exponentially every second. Tuesday was uneventful as far as I can remember, but Wednesday I was sitting at my computer on my yoga ball, doing my closing paperwork and probably at least occasionally checking out which tiny little snowsuit we'd get to purchase once I found out if Beau was a boy or a girl, when I felt a new feeling. But this one was so different from the one where I'd felt him doing flip turns. This wasn't exactly uncomfortable, but it stopped me, and it did cause me pause. I stored it away and decided it would be the perfect introduction to our midwife appointment on Friday. I had an appointment at a different building on our campus that same day, just about an hour later, and as I walked over, I felt it again. It wasn't painful, but it was noticeable, and it stopped me walking right in my tracks. I had that long commute home, and I called Stephen, who told me to call the midwife. So I called my mom, who told me to call the midwife. And so, realizing I had no one else to call, I called the midwife. I described it to her as best as I could, and she said it didn't sound like something we needed to deal with right away, that we could wait for our appointment in just 2 days, but to pay attention and to let her know if anything shifted. The next day was my last day at work, and I didn't care. I had eyes only for Friday's 10 a.m. appointment with Stacy. Stephen and I drove and felt comforted that I hadn't felt anything more odd, hadn't had any sort of bleeding. In fact, that Friday morning I woke up and I could so clearly see Beau tucked down in my lower right side, right where he'd nudged me just a couple days before. We were encouraged, but we were ready to see Stacy. We arrived. I walked into the bathroom first thing because he was putting the pressure on my bladder already, and I was reminded of my anxiety when I saw the tiny little diapers on her changing table. We went in and tried to have small talk, but she very astutely asked if we should start with the heartbeat because she could tell I wasn't going to relax until we heard him. We went over to her table, she pulled out her wand, and we waited. She searched and she searched, and we began the process of trying so hard to not know what we were already coming to know. She told us in our previous appointment that at 14 weeks he'd be too big to dive away from the wand anymore. She tried to come up with an alternate reason why we couldn't hear him. She assured us she could feel my uterus was just the size it should be. Perhaps we needn't worry. She tried, but we all knew. She encouraged us to go to the hospital and get an ultrasound. You'll either find out today you're not as far along as you thought, or you'll not hear good news. But at least today you'll know. We booked the ultrasound as soon as we could, but we still had to wait a couple hours. But eventually, though not nearly soon enough, Melissa, the ultrasound tech, took us back to her room. Again, the wand was to my belly, and on a giant TV screen right in front of our eyes was the most perfect little baby you've ever seen. Except he wasn't moving. Melissa was moving her wand and making measurements and walking us through what she was measuring and how Bo was measuring at 16 weeks and how I was likely further along than we knew. I had charted correctly, so I knew this wasn't accurate, but also at the same time it confirmed that he wasn't smaller than we thought, and that it wasn't just that he could swim below the Doppler. Stephen stood right beside me on the left-hand side, and we held hands. As we watched Bo, already knowing what we knew, I knew because he should be moving. I'd already felt Bo, and I knew he was a very active little person, but Bo wasn't moving anymore. And Melissa, finally with tears in her eyes, said, "I am afraid I do not have good news for you." She got the radiologist, he came in, he remeasured, he confirmed. I don't remember much of what he said, but what I do remember haunts me. You can tell by something about the thickening of his skin that he's been gone for about 3 days. Like lightning, I was thrown back 3 days to that Wednesday when I was stopped in my tracks by something unidentifiable happening. I felt my baby die. He also said something that remains a point of uncertainty and contention between us. But what I heard was something about him suffering. I don't remember what he said. But Bo's suffering in me is really more than I can bear. It's not that I feel like I could have saved him, but I have wondered. It's the idea that our child could suffer in me. I'm the one given the gift, the responsibility to protect, to nurture, and to grow him. Anyway, that comment sent me right back into my fog, although not yet, because we had decisions to make. We had to go back to Stacy's and learn our options. I called my mom on the way and I told her the news. Her grandbaby died. He looked perfect and big and likely had pinched his own cord, and that was all we knew. But could she come please, and could she come as soon as possible? Stacy presented us with options and the wisdom to choose relatively quickly, so we didn't just churn and churn. So we went home, we sought counsel. We each called several friends, family members, hoping someone would have a magic answer. We began to plan for a D&C the following day so we could return to St. Louis, so we could be home and have my mom mother us. Then I spoke with one of my dearest friends and she said, "I think that's a good plan. That way you can just get this over with and you can begin to heal." Get this over with. It struck a chord in me. I didn't want to get anything over with. This was the birthing of a baby I'd come to know and love. And then again, I knew what I knew. I knew I wanted to labor and bring forth our child, even though our hello would be our goodbye. I got off the phone immediately and told Stephen. He hadn't known until I said it out loud, but this was the only solution that brought some semblance of peace to him as well. So we packed our overnight bag, chose the option Stacy presented to us. We went to labor and delivery, and we were to be induced with our firstborn. On our way out of our apartment to the hospital, we received 2 packages. One was a super soft baby blanket where on one side was a sweet pale green. The other was white with little pale green elephants and had a matching little hat. The other package was from my big brother. He sent a book called Memoirs of a Goldfish. The sloppy inscription, his handwriting, it looks exactly the same as it did when he first learned to write at all, was the most beautiful thing. Welcome, Bo, to this family. There's a little responsibility, a lot of fun, and more love than you can imagine. We love you already. Your Uncle Luke. We drove to the ED holding these little gifts, and I was so full. The admissions process was a blur. It probably always is. We finally, through a whole lot of confusion and a lot of frustration, reached a birthing room around 6 p.m. We hadn't eaten since breakfast. We weren't hungry, but Stephen felt like we probably needed to eat. And reluctantly, he went in search of food with the promise that since my mom was in the air working her way towards us, I'd call my sister-in-law, Elisa, and talk the entire time he was gone. But instead, in came the nurse for admissions work. I don't remember her name anymore, only that she was an experienced nurse, but she was new to Montana. She and I connected immediately. She was kind and seemed to feel everything I was feeling, but somehow she was able to function and manage me in ways where I didn't feel managed, but definitely cared for. Her husband had taken a professor job at NU, and that very day, their daughter Calypso had taken her first steps. Stephen came back, and all he'd missed was me doing the paperwork. He had a bag full of odd and end food, and all I could remember was him pulling out a burrito and a block of cheese. He pulled more items from the bag, and he already knew he hadn't gotten what he'd meant to get. There was really nothing he could have gotten. We weren't able to think about things like what food we might need. We were consumed elsewhere. Him being back bolstered my spirits and gave me the strength I needed to endure what was to come. Shortly after 8 p.m. on October 8th, it was the nurse I liked who administered my first dose of the misoprostol. It wasn't her, but the experience that was utterly violating. I was pregnant and still visibly full of Beau, at least when I laid flat, and I could feel the little hard place that was him, and he was wonderful. Being pregnant with him had grown into becoming wonderful, and I didn't want him to come out yet. I wanted to grow him. I didn't want to be empty of him. So I had to lie on that hospital bed and have a nurse insert something into me and then onto my cervix that would ultimately cause my body to release that which I was so desperately hanging on to. I died a little. Violation. Steve and I laid in that bed all night, my contractions being monitored and every few hours being violated again with that misoprostol. We cried and we cried. We held one another. The nurses would have to come in every so often to take out all the wires and then rewire them again every time I had to go to the bathroom, which was pretty often because I was 14 weeks pregnant and he was still crushing my bladder. I lay there in a labor and delivery room, staring at an empty baby's bed across the bed from mine, knowing that my baby would never occupy that bed. Stephen dozed off just a little every now and then, and at one point I asked Stephen for a water, which was right beside him, and in his sleep he picked it up and moved it all the way to the furthest side of the table, and he fell immediately back to sleep. I brought a smile and even a little laugh, which was enough to wake him. I drank the water and we laughed, and then we cried again. I'm sure we talked, but I don't remember anything we said. Mostly I think we just cried and held one another. At some point, some nurse, I don't remember who, made a point to tell us gently that when the baby did come, not to expect a big, full, chubby-cheeked, full-term baby. That we couldn't be sure at all what we would be able to see, and that he might even come in pieces. That was horrible to hear, but we knew it was an option, and I was grateful to have a proper expectation. My tears never did run dry that night. Eventually I fell asleep sometime around 4:30, only to be woken up shortly thereafter with the noises of celebration not far away. A baby had been born. Someone's living baby was born in a nearby room, and they were right to celebrate such a gift. But it was a deep and a swift pang. And at 6 a.m. I woke up with my water breaking. Felt like I was peeing, but it became clear quickly that labor had begun and he was coming. The nurses began telling me that unlike in natural labor where there are ebbs and flows to contractions, when being induced, once labor actually kicks in, there's no pause. And additionally, my body wasn't ready to let him go, so I myself was resisting. Not on purpose, of course. But I was contracted. Stephen labored right there along with me. We hadn't taken a birthing class. We were 3.5 months pregnant, but we did our best looking for comfortable positions. And then at 7 a.m., the nurses had their shift change. I was too deep into labor to much care, but I felt frustrated with the bustle and the change, but also sad that my new friend would not be the one to see me through this labor. Things settled down after the shift, and we were left mostly alone to labor, and then while I was on my hands and knees and Stephen was pressing on my contracting back, I felt like he was coming. He came out head first, and then his little left arm fell right over his head. I immediately was pulled from the fog that had become labor and said out loud, "Oh, I need to hold him." But Stephen wisely said, "Oh no, don't pull him." And then she pushed the button for the nurse. She came in, she supported and held him while we waited for him to come all the way out. And he did, and he was perfect. 4.5 inches and 0.08 ounces of sweet perfection. And he was a boy. During the night, never once did it occur to us to discuss what we would do once he came. We hadn't had the wherewithal to even wonder about such a thing, but now he was here and we were holding him, and his little hand fit perfectly on my fingertip. You could see the wrinkles in his hands, his handprints. I'm sure we cried and just looked at him, and if we said anything at all, it was just to marvel at how developed he was. I couldn't believe it. And then in a quiet moment, Stephen took out his Bible and he blessed him. He placed the name of God on him. I'm just as overwhelmed at the holiness of that moment now as I was by it then. I sang to him a goodbye lullaby, promising that God would be watching over him. We had not planned any of this, but we were doing it. And our time with our firstborn was holy and beautiful. The nurses offered helpful information. We learned there was a funeral home that would perform his cremation, that would come and pick him up, and that we could have his ashes the following day. We hadn't thought of an alternate plan. We hadn't thought of a plan at all, so that was how it would go. The nurses took him to get his handprints, and Stephen helped me into the shower. How can I shower Stephen? I'll wash everything that I have left of him off of me. I don't want to be this empty, please, please. He steadied me. I watched blood go down in the drain and I got dressed again. They brought him back to us, and we held him for a long time, more talking, took pictures. We took pictures of us with him. And then we knew it was time to go. Couldn't stay forever, so we had to leave. And we had to leave him there. I handed him over to a nurse and walked out of Bozeman Deaconess, a living, walking tomb. I had once been full of life, and then death, and known nothing. It was an emptiness I can't begin to describe. Stephen, acutely aware of the ache that was beginning to occupy his arms. He knew he should be holding something, but there was nothing to hold. The nurses had given us a weighted teddy bear for just such an ache, and for weeks he clung to that bear, something fierce. It was really a perfect metaphor, for indeed we were barely hanging on. We had done something hard. We'd done it together, and that was something else we had, each other. For as long as I live, I will never be able to articulate the intimacy that Stephen and I shared in the weeks that followed Bo's birth. We learned to live with his death. Whatever Stephen and I were before October 9th, 2010, we were something different now, richer, fuller, deeper, as we emerged from that labor and delivery room. That is intimacy. That is connection. We went through fire and came out. The weeks and months, and sometimes I feel how we're impacted still by our losing our firstborn. It was something horrendous. I threw a lot of wine bottles in my mom's basement. Stephen said some really hurtful comments, more than he's ever said before. I began to look like the shell of a person I felt like I already was inside. We fully embodied our experience. We refused people's shallow requests for us to get over it and to move on. We rejected people's trite comments to trust that we would have more babies. We refused to rush our sorrow. We grew into the people who can say, we lament. That is my story.
That's amazing, buddy. It is. It's like, that's like, I can't believe. It's like being there all over again.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like that too. I think that lightning, remember I said in some point, when the radiologist said it had been 3 days. Like lightning, I was back to 3 days before, and this just feels like 9 years is a wrinkle in time. I'm just right there.
I forgot a lot of it. I mean, I remember all of those things, but I don't like.
Process
I mean, like
that
you,
way.
yeah, like you remember, like they're there. Like you can be right there.
Yeah.
You know, like you really can. It's really beautiful. It really was. I mean, I feel terrible saying like that was awesome, but it was really good. Like, it was
Thanks.
really, really, really good. Was it, I mean, yeah, what was it?
It's good to write. It was so hard to write.
Yeah.
It's hard to read. It's hard to be people who lament.
Yeah.
It is. But it happened. I wish it didn't happen. Kind of. I'm so thankful for him. I wish we had him. I wish
Yeah.
his 9th birthday was coming up where we would get to have cake he could eat. We
Yeah.
still do have cake on his birthday. I think we've told you that, mostly for our other boys who love
Cake. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. It was good to write in this season. I mean, we've written Bo's story in different ways, but like if you've ever shared a story, or I know you have had this experience where even if I write this story today, a year from now, it will be different. You know, you just experience it differently, and your life, my life experiences have changed in 9 years. So I'm a very Stephen will read his in a little while, and I'm literal. I'm like, and then this is what happened, and then this is what happened.
Aw.
And that is soothing to me.
Yeah.
I like that. It just helps me remember, and I don't want to forget. Not that I could exactly, but I really hated being pregnant.
It was hard.
And then
Super hard.
after we lost him, I felt a lot of shame about that for a while. I feel like I've forgiven myself or recognized that it's really okay to have hated it because it was really horrible.
It's hard, it seems.
And it doesn't mean I hated him. But, man, I wish we had him.
Yeah.
I wish, had him here. We obviously had him. That is my story.
Yeah, I think the thing that always sticks out to me, that is always difficult for me, is just your body, like the body part, right? Like the part like where you remember everything, like it fit what it felt like, that you can remember what it felt like for him to move, that you can remember what it felt like to, like you said, for him to die. You know, like those things are things I don't have a hold on. Like I will never like feel or know.
Yeah.
I just am always so like, I think that there's just a level of hurt and pain there that is so hard, like to be able to touch with you, like to be able to like kind of understand with you. And I hate that in a way you have that, but then I think it's also special to you.
Totally,
you know?
exactly. That's what I was thinking you were going to say, because I can't imagine not having those things.
Yeah.
Those are treasures.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful gift. He was a beautiful gift. Being able to be pregnant with him was a beautiful gift. For my whole body.
Yeah.
And man, miscarriage.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like I'm so glad we got, like I was there, you know, like I got to be your husband, you know, the one who got to be there with you. Really,
It would have been so different. Already my story could change, but the part when you ripped it out, when you took out your Bible, I mean, man, I think I just said it was a holy or beautiful experience. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a plan, and I don't know, I feel like you just brought in yourself, which is that present and sort of pastoral and not a trite way or something, but you brought that holiness and you blessed him. Man, that's that intimacy. Like we could talk about it all day long, but being there, like we got to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, we have it forever.
We get to have that together forever.
Yeah. I loved hearing your story.
Thank you for listening. Thank you all for listening.
I love you very much.
Me too. We'll talk more. But thank you all.
So we'll probably take a little pause
Yes,
and then
please.
come back for part 2. So we'll see you in a few minutes.